I'm on. Anyway. So I know a lot of you will be sad this could be possibly our last meeting.
Possible.
You never know up here. So anyway, Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To start this out, a couple weeks ago, we had a presentation by Allie Devine of Devine, Donnelly, and Murray, and it's on rural housing. This rural housing initiative is extremely important to many of us in rural Kansas. By all indications, whether it's in private or public studies, the lack of housing in our rural communities is the number one problem we have of attracting businesses. The current funding programs to assist these counties and cities and projects are extremely limited. At best, at times that we've had about $2 million in these projects to get these houses or any of these types of revitalization done to these homes. The governor's budget, as stands right now, has about $20 million in the moderate income housing program. The director of Kansas Housing and Resource testified there are applications pending, probably for up around $10 million. The request presented by the coalition of many different ag groups, economists across the country or across the state, really would like to see a one-time investment. This doesn't mean year to year. This is a one-time opportunity that we have of putting $50 million into rural housing development. The coalition has already applied for spark money. If that could happen, we could reduce this amount of SGF funds that we would put in. But if the appropriation of funding is a variety of programs that could be handled through the KHRC, and they've got a history of making $1 of investment equal to at least $6 of performance. So that's what's really important about this proposal. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would move that the House Subcommittee on House Ag and Natural Resources budget recommend to the full House of Appropriations that the budget be amended to include a one-time appropriation of $50 million in FY23. If the spark money or other funds are approved in an amount not less than $50 million, this amendment would be removed from consideration. If spark or other funds are approved in the amount of less than 50, the amendment must be modified that we carry out the $50 million appropriation.
Second, Mr. Baker. Discussion? Representative?
Just a question, Representative Newland, when you were reading that, I didn't quite get what causes it to come out of the budget. If it comes out of the budget, what is it? What
On
does
the
your motion
spark?
say? Could you read that part of the motion again, please?
If the spark or other funds are approved in an amount of not less than $50 million, this amendment would be removed from consideration. If spark or other funds are approved in the amount of less than $50 million, the amendment may be modified in the amount necessary to provide the $50 million in funding.
Okay, I understand what you're doing. Thank you.
Representative Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Newland, what, maybe I probably have forgotten, what is the request via Spark for this initiative? Do you know how much they are requesting?
My understanding is they have requested the full $50 million.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so this doesn't go in any specific budget. It's a budget item to be added to the full budget.
That is correct.
It's not ag, it's not rural, anything. It's
This money would be into the,
just a line item in the budget. All right, thank you.
right, and it would be used by the KHRC.
Okay, KHRC, but, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Or Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, so just a couple of questions. I talked to actually several of my economic development folks the last week after that hearing. It was a very informative hearing, actually, and I appreciated it. And we talked about all the different things that are affecting 117, including our incredible population loss, which I appreciated Ms. Devine bringing. That was good information. One of their concerns is that when things in Topeka are called rural, that they don't always get actually out. Thank you. They don't, I did get this. They don't always get actually out to the rural areas. And so this 50 million, this KHRC group, how do we know, or what are the criterion in which those funds are going to actually make it to the communities in which they're intended? How does that work?
Thank you for the question. You know, there's several guidelines that this agency would use, especially like first-time homeowners. It would be used for down payment assistance. Eligibility is dependent on income. It's federally funded, but now we're using SGF funds for this and not relying on that. They can utilize and leverage money for federal funds that we could eventually, if we had the full 50 million, could determine that we could acquire 300 million. So that's the benefit of going through this agency.
Follow up, if I might, Mr. Chair. So there's not any sort of ceiling that says, or criterion that says, hey, X amount of funds goes to communities. You know, when people think rural, I've heard the numbers 50,000, 20,000. So there's nothing, and I don't know. I don't know much about that organization, KHRC. But is there anything criterion that says, hey, this XYZ funds, $5 million is going to communities less than 5,000 in their county? Is there anything like that?
This is under 60,000 population in the county. That means there are 39 counties in the state that would not qualify for these funds. And so if you lessen that number, you cut out even that many more small rural communities, because like in Douglas County, there are small communities there, but the county itself is so large that they wouldn't qualify.
I appreciate that answer. I just want to make sure. I know we always in the legislature send a bunch of money and call it rural whatever to make it little shiny, little, let's help rural America. But I just am concerned that those funds never get to the people they're supposed to help. Well, I want to help them. I just want to make sure it gets to the communities actually that need that help. Thank you very much, Joe.
Representative Baker?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's clearly spelled out that it will be rural. It's spelled out in the bill.
60,000 or less.
Yes.
Representative Acula?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like this idea because with redistricting, we might be able to change some boundaries over in your area.
It's possible.
I have a series of questions, not a lot, but I'm from previous municipality representation on the city council. Rural housing is more expensive than in-city housing. Do you know what that percentage is above?
I do not know myself for sure. I don't know if there's somebody in here that might be able to
I'm
answer
sure there's an
that.
average. I know it varies, but I bet there's an average. I'm just curious what that might be. We don't got nobody.
I apologize. I just
When
don't
you
have
guys
that
want to
number.
guess? No? Well, that was one of my questions. The second of my questions is how did you come about the 50? Without knowing the answer to that question.
Right. And I have that. I don't remember where I put my paper now.
I'm putting you on the spot. I like the idea.
Yes, I know. And what's that?
Here, I'm gonna throw all my stuff. Joe's got his stuff.
I don't know, I'm going to ask Ally if she would come up and explain that. She can explain it much better than I can.
Well, I don't know if I have all of the answer, but I'll give you what we've done. Josh Rowe, who's an economist who worked with the Department of Ag for years, over the weekend, we were talking about this issue. We started out with a variety of different numbers. And when we got down to it, we started to look at what would it cost to retire the 1% of every county where 1% of the housing is insufficient. If we were going to replace all of that, what would it be? What would it cost? And that's roughly $105 million to replace the 1% that's in below standard quality. So we backed that down, and using extrapolation, I know this sounds like a lot of guru, and I'm not the math person that did it, but we figured out that the 50 million is not too much, but it's not too little. So it gets us in the game, and with coupling it with partnerships with other existing funding, we think we can make a good dent in some of these areas.
So was there any financial study done to determine what the purchase of land or different areas within?
No, we went strictly off the housing assessment documents. Frankly, when we started to go down to those places, it ties into other factors and other programs. So we kind of stuck to what we had.
Thank you.
Give your name.
Allie Devine.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, and so my last question is, out of that 50, how much of that will be administrative costs for people that are going to be administering those dollars?
My understanding, this is already set up. They're already administrating these types of units. And so it's very minimal of what additional costs there would be.
Any idea what minimal is? Because if I was a millionaire, minimal would be a lot different to the.
We've got the good answer for this. If
Come on down. And then, give who you are and who you are stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ryan Vincent. I'm Executive Director at Kansas Housing, and you're probably getting sick of hearing from me. I know I've been here a few times talking about housing issues. Special little shout out to the Vincent family boys who are off school today and helping watch Dad in action here. It's exciting to be a part of the political process and ultimately what I hope be a part of history for our state. I'm truly investing in homes in our state, which is so important. I'm happy to maybe try to answer a couple of the questions that came up during the committee meeting. I can start with Representative Alcala. As far as administrative costs, KHRC is entirely self-funded. We charge fees for services of the programs that we run. 99% of our programs are federally funded, so 99% of our administrative costs are charged to those federal programs. That's a benefit and a service that we bring to the state, in that we are, up until currently, we're getting $2 million a year from the state, and none of that is being charged to administrative costs. We get $2 million a year, we put that out the door. Now, obviously, as the percentage of state funds grows, we're going to have to take administrative costs, but that's going to be a portion to our cost plan, which is a fancy way of saying that we're only going to charge the actual cost that we incur, which tends to be, we're estimating MIH runs about 5%. So that's maybe a nice template to maybe assume what the administrative costs would be for our office. But again, until now, we haven't charged the state anything to administer that program. Maybe to get to a couple of the other questions, I think there was a question about how do we ensure that ultimately rural communities, small towns are served. And my response to that is just the history. KHRC has, through our entire history as an organization, served rural communities as much as urban ones. Half of our tax credit developments have been built in rural communities, whether it's Neodesha or some of these smaller towns. That we have a history of serving them. We know that the needs are probably higher in rural communities than in urban communities, despite the difference in land cost. Maybe a nice average to give you an example of what it costs to be able to close the gap. For our moderate income housing program, we average about $25,000 per unit of subsidy. So that might give you kind of an estimate of, assuming that it was all in MIH, $50 million divided by $25,000 would give you a rough number of the units using history of what we could finance through the program. That said, that the more we can work in larger areas, the more we can gain economies of scale, the more dollars we can leverage, the actual dollar per unit that we're having to finance is going to go down, which is why I do caution about putting too many restrictions on whatever funds we ultimately seed the Housing Trust Fund with. And it's not because we're not wanting to serve rural areas, but it is a developer-driven program. We don't know what developments are going to happen. We don't know what applications we're going to get. So if we say, well, X number of dollars has to be in communities under 5,000, 10,000, that's great. And we're going to try our best. But we could end up with a bunch of applications that aren't good applications, that don't leverage a lot of funds, that aren't the best use of dollars. What I encourage is just a level of trust to the development community where we have the professionals, we have the stakeholders, we have the connections, and with the dollars, we can then make sure that all of the communities, rural, however we define that, are served. So that's the ultimate recommendation. Obviously, we're going to welcome any investment and parameters you give us. So we certainly are happy to do that. We just don't want to restrict a program that has been so successful because it's been responsive and flexible to date.
Representative? Okay.
So I'm a yes or no guy, a short answer guy, okay? So here's my question to you. Will you be administrating the matching, looking for matching federal money? Will your organization be doing that?
Yes. You're referring specifically to Spark dollars if we were to get those.
Any other federal funds that might be able to be acquired through the 50 million?
Yes, which is a real benefit that we bring is that we're already administering the federal dollars. So we know how to couple whatever state dollars you put into it with all of the other federal programs, whether that's tax credits, whether it's weatherization, whether it's actual development dollars.
What's been your success rate on that average on matching federal dollars with administered money?
Well, it's been great because at this point we've only received $2 million a year, but we're generating hundreds of $1 millions in housing development activity each year.
Local contractors, development areas?
Absolutely. So we've got local development teams. We're certainly trying to incentivize any local developers and contractors that we can, which is always the challenge. That's one of the housing study findings is that we don't have enough local developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, my comments, Mr. Vincent said exactly far better than I could have. I was just going to respond to the two representatives' questions. The 2 years that I spent serving on the Rural Revitalization Committee, we really dove into a lot of those housing programs and realized that, hey, what we've got actually works. We just need to promote it and make sure everybody understands. Having a very active economic development director in each community or one per county that really understands what's available. To Representative Lee's question, that's really how we get those dollars out the door, to make sure people understand what's available. And the programs are there. If the money is there, it's going to be well utilized. We just need to make sure that the public knows about it. So, thank you.
Thank you. I think you just answered one of my questions, and I tried to get this information the other day in, I think, appropriations committee, but I didn't ask the question right, so I probably won't again. But he's talking about community leadership, economic development driven. My question was, will you be following business growth? And so that answer seems to be yes. So if you have a business that wants to come into Finney County or Ford County or somewhere and needs housing, that would be a place you would look. I'm just trying to figure out how it's going to actually benefit the right communities where there is a need, and the need is urgent because this company wants to come. I think of the dairy in Thomas County that needed 40 houses. And the people that owned the dairy bought them and moved them in. So I remember that tour. And so I mean, it's not 10 houses, it may be 40 houses, and that would eat up $50 million pretty fast, probably. I mean, it would start, if you had a couple of those, you'd start going down that. So is it developer driven? Is it business growth driven? What do you see is going to bring the need to you?
Excellent question, Representative, and it's all of the above. It's a chicken and egg situation that we find ourselves day in and day out, that we've got to have homes for us to attract businesses, and we've got to have business to attract homes. And that's why it's absolutely vital that every sector is working together. We've got a Department of Commerce that is working to provide economic development dollars. We're working with the Department of Commerce to make sure that we're getting information on where they're putting investments into local communities so that we can connect our network of housing developers to those communities. We've done that already on a small scale. We certainly have been in Salina and Iola and Dodge City and Yodashay. I keep mentioning Yodashay just because I went to the community. I remember the growth that they were seeing. Iola, they were seeing such rapid growth with the Russell Stover plant. And it's absolutely vital that we're aware of where there are job growth so that we can ensure that we're using that in making our allocation decisions. I mean, in our qualified allocation plan, in our different funding plans, we actually try to incentivize leverage of funds as well as community growth to get the dollars to those communities.
So I understand that we could build houses, we could probably refurbish houses, we could do weatherization projects, whatever it takes in a community to bring the development, basically, is what one of your goals would be. What will the tenant pay? Will they buy? Will they rent? And will they pay full interest rates, or is there a lower? Tell me, what, if I'm buying the house, what would I get from the state's investment?
It really depends on which program is ultimately being utilized. So assuming that the committee and the legislature funds $50 million for the State Housing Trust Fund, we have a variety of programs that are already in existence that we can couple that money with to make any of those programs serve more people, build more homes. And ultimately, moderate income housing as an example, the requirement will be that the units that are funded through our program will serve people between 60 and 150% of area median income.
Okay,
For a
there's
house,
some guideline there.
yeah, absolutely. So it really depends.
So you can be flexible per tenant and per company that's doing it, what fits the area, the person, the company that's coming in, and maybe they're gonna kick in some money too. Can you receive money from a corporation?
We can, and that's the beauty of this trust fund, is that by statute, we're allowed to accept community foundation dollars, private employer dollars, and we've done that to make sure that we're leveraging that $6 or whatever dollars per $1 of state investment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ryan, for your more thorough explanation.
Thanks, Rob.
Question?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of questions. Is KHRC private? Is it a private group or is it a state funded group?
We are a statutory corporation, so we don't receive funds from the state, but our board is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. We're wrapped up in the state's audited financial statements. We are audited by the feds, by legislative post audit, by state programs. About every other week, it feels like there's an audit, which is important because ultimately it's tax dollars that we administer, and we know that. We want to be accountable, and we are.
Perfect. Are there any programs currently with a population of 10,000 or less specifically? You know what, again, we talk about rural, and if you have a Walmart, you're not rural. If you have a Dollar General, maybe, but probably not if you have a Walmart. So are there any programs currently, and again, I completely support rural housing, rural development, rural revitalization, as long as these funds are getting to actual rural. I appreciated Joe's data of all of my communities, besides Fort and Finney, which I have a few townships. I mean, everything is under 3,000, 4,000 actually. And so what programs do you currently have that are serving those communities? I mean,
excellent question, and the vast majority of our programs do. So we have participating lenders that can provide first-time homebuyer loans in the smallest community because it's by homeowner, by person purchasing a home. We have weatherization funds that can be used in the smallest community to the largest in the state. We've got tenant-based rental assistance that we provide through our programs. Our actual housing development, we are probably the sole funder of housing in some of those small communities that you mentioned. If you see new housing being built, it's most likely funded through one of our programs. And it's because it takes so much gap financing to get development in those extreme rural communities. And they need homes, and we understand that. And it may be a duplex that we're ultimately able to build, but it may be the only new housing that community has seen in a number of years. We offer homeowner assistance funds. We've got homeowner rehab, which could be funded through the trust fund. Right now, we don't have a source of funds to do that. So it really depends on what parameters you ultimately give us. But my only caution is just not to put such stringent targeting requirements that it ultimately negatively affects our ability to serve those communities.
So you don't like population constraints?
We welcome population constraints so we can work within them. I personally like the MIH, the 60,000, because at some point I know you have to draw a line, and whatever the right line to draw is. But I do think you hit a level where a community has the means and the capacity to be able to meet some of their own housing needs. And we know that at some point it's too small to do so. I just think we don't want to necessarily weed out potential communities just because of a population threshold.
I appreciate those responses and having this candid conversation. I don't know. I want to support this in theory, but I look at, for instance, Finney County. Just you use the 60,000 number. Finney County and Ford County, largest two counties probably in western Kansas, and they're not even at the 40,000 threshold. And so those two cities serve pretty much all of liberal too, probably Southwest Kansas, and yet 60,000 would be double their population. So I don't know. I want to be able to. I know that I spoke with the community development gal in Jetmore, and they're getting a lot of overflow because of what's happening in Dodge, because of those dairies and because of the cheese factory that's going in. So I understand that it's a need. I want to make sure that if it's rural, that it actually goes to rural, because I just am tired of the government throwing money, hoping it sticks on the wall, and putting rural on it so a bunch of urban legislators will vote for it and sleep better at night. But I do appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate your responses. Thank you very much.
One question. Is there a timeline on the 50 million in years term? Is there does it go till it's spent? Is that kind of what you want to say, or what's your timeline of using it?
Mr. Chairman, that's ultimately up to the parameters that the legislature sets. Recognizing that development does take time, I would again caution not to put too aggressive of a timeline. We do have a universe of applications for MIH, for housing development, that we can fund almost, I'm not going to say immediately, but very quickly, because they've already passed the planning side. We also could put out an RFP and get dollars out the door within a matter of months to communities, because we have established programs and partners. Beyond that, whatever your parameters are, we're obviously going to honor and abide by. But we also, if the dollars are big enough, we would encourage us to try to set up revolving loans so that some of these dollars can come back to the state and be used again more than once.
I think it's
The last question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for giving me this shot here. With that said, and I understand questioning how are we going to use the 50. It might be that I'm not sure we need an amendment, but recently it's almost like a sunset, or I'm asking for information from you to make sure you come back and let this committee know what you've done with, maybe in 2 years, come back and give us a report of how it's working, how you're allocating the money to what counties, what rural cities. That would be something I would suggest.
Absolutely, Representative. And we do report to the legislature every year. We submit to House Appropriation and Senate Ways and Means a report on all of our state housing trust fund activities. And of course, I'm most happy to come speak to any of the committees as asked.
You might just add agricultural subcommittee.
Okay, good job.
Because this is a general appropriation.
So,
It's not from-
just to make sure we understand the amendment, Representative, run it through one more time. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that the House Subcommittee on House Ag and Natural Resources Budget recommend to the full House of Appropriations that the budget be amended to include a one-time appropriation of not less than $50 million to the FY 2023 Kansas Housing Resource Corporation Trust Fund for the implementation of housing programs and projects in rural cities and counties. Further, if the Spark or other funds are approved in an amount not less than $50 million, this amendment would be removed from consideration. If Spark or other funds are approved in the amount of less than $50 million, the amendment may be modified in the amount necessary to provide $50 million of funding. And I would also insert that they report back to this committee yearly on their progress.
It's time to vote.
We have a second.
Well,
What's that?
Victoria, ask what your question. Yeah.
She's amending this amendment? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
You're amending this amendment?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I like this bill. And it's needed. I really want to make sure that there's at least a portion of those funds that rural goes to rural. So, my amendment would be that at least 15 million would go to would be set aside, earmarked for communities that are a population of 10,000 or less. So we need a second.
I'll second it.
Discussion.
I'll discuss. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Oh, I was first, Jim. My point is that it's for economic development, right? I mean, is that clear in this? It is for economic. So if your community of that size has an economic development project, they would qualify. But we aren't just going in and starting to build houses, right? I mean, it has to be driven by business, like I asked, and they said yes, and developer growth because of some reason, some business wants to come there. I'm okay with that, but is that, well, I asked that question. I thought that's the answer.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Well, Mr. Chairman, here's where I'm coming from. I understand what the representative's saying, but I think that restricts the ability of Mr. Vincent's group to really analyze and really give the money to those particular communities that really need affordable housing. And I don't want to lock 15 million in just for that particular purpose. I want to allow him to look at all counties under 60,000 and see what are the priorities and utilize that money appropriately. So I really can't support your amendment.
So, if there's no other discussion, let's, Representative.
I probably could have left this unsaid, but yeah, I can't support the amendment neither. I think he made it real clear when he came up, he would accept some restrictions, but I think this restriction might make it even tougher for him to make development within the areas that may need it. So I wouldn't support it.
Mr. Chair, I would just say that when I vote for rural, I want to make sure that it's rural. I close on my amendment. Thank you. My motion.
Those in favor of the $15 million amendment, say aye. Opposed?
No.
The noes seem to have it. So back on the original Newland motion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. So, good job. So, next on the agenda is we're going to start working the KDHE budget. Any questions? As you're sitting, while you're digging out your stuff, I have I have a proviso for this budget. Victoria, you want to pass this out? When you get this committee, take a look at it. Basically, I can read it, whatever, but basically this is just saying that this gives the administration the authority to hire one professional engineer for the livestock waste management section for a salary up to $95,000 to fill that vacant position. And that kind of sums that up. I mean, do you have any questions? Any discussion? Representative Akala?
Mr. Chair, what is the average salary for a position like that?
I believe.
I just.
Well, I
wondered
think
how
it's
we got-
75, but
How we got to the
Leo, do you
95.
want to say something on this? Or one of you?
Good afternoon, Chairman Corbett, committee members. So right now, I'm sorry. My name's Leo Henning. I'm the Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment. So currently, a professional engineer or licensed engineer for KDHE with state employment, I believe, is $72,000 a year. I'm going to repeat something that I hope I've heard from the Livestock Association, and when they said that a normal salary for a licensed engineer is around 92 to 94,000 a year, and that is why we cannot attract anybody to apply for these engineering positions. Is we are not competitive in the open marketplace.
So this just basically is saying that one professional engineer for the livestock waste management section up to $95,000 to fill a vacant position. That's pretty cut and okay. Discussion. Those in favor say aye. Opposed. Proviso will be put in. We're going to continue on now and work in the KDHE budget. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take you back a little bit. The last couple of years, we've been dealing with the grain warehouse inspection, and I thought we were on KDHE.
That's no more than a speeding ticket. You're fine. So we're back on working the KDHE environment budget. Do we have is there any discussion?
Yep, Mr. Chair, I did some looking at this budget over the weekend, and I moved to cut this budget by 5%.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Mr. Garber. Any discussion? Victoria, can you tell me kind of what that might be for a dollar and cents? Approximately. So this will be about a $6 million reduction. Is there any more discussion? Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, sorry,
Can I clarify the motion?
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify your motion, if that's okay. Um, First, the fiscal year for fiscal year 23 or 22 or 23. And is that all funding sources or just state general fund or? Okay.
Second, still good? Okay. Discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
The noes seem to have it. Huh.
You can record mine.
You want to, okay. That's three.
That's okay. Nobody else
You
wants
want
to.
division?
No, nobody
Okay.
else wants to.
Okay. Okay.
Record and I'll record.
Okay. We're back on the KDHE budget. Questions? Discussions? We'll make a motion then.
Mr. Chair, I move we pass out the KDHE budget as presented. As amended. I'm sorry, sure.
Baker second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes seem to have it. KDHE budget is passed. Next on the agenda, we're going to be working the Kansas Department of Ag budget. Any questions on ag? Representative?
Let's see if I have the right budget this time, Mr. Chairman. I think I do get a little confused when you're talking about inspections that we've done over the last few years dealing with KDHE and now the grain warehouse program, which is in the ag department. And if you remember, I believe we talked about that we had added 60,000 SGF in 21, but the program wasn't budgeted for 22. And so you'll have an amendment that Victoria will pass out. And basically what it's doing is adding 60,000 state general fund money for the grain warehouse program for 23 and 24. And this will allow the agency to reduce its proposed fee increases on the grain warehouses in the state. So I would be glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
We have a second. Mr. Alcala. Discussion? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to belabor the point, but I support this motion and look forward to voting for it.
So we're going to take 60,000 out of the general fund to prevent, so that they will not have to increase their fee, is what I'm reading this. Is that correct? So we're making all taxpayers pay for this instead of those who have grain warehouses, is the way I understand this. Is that correct? Well, anybody that wants to answer it.
My understanding is that it has been underfunded, but the reason they're trying to protect producers from higher storage fees and those types of fees. And they didn't have this in their budget. The governor didn't recommend it, but we've used this in prior years, and so we were just wanting to put this back in.
So we're passing this on, my question again, to all taxpayers instead of those who have these grain warehouses, public grain warehouses,
You can
and
put it that way.
increasing their fee.
Yes, you
I'm
could.
not going to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, while I appreciate my friend to the left of me, I actually think that this is, I think that this is a good amendment, because if we look at right now what's going on with our producers, of course, commodity prices are not bad right now, but if we look at what's going on with producers, it's not a good situation for them making their farms cash flow. My question is, do we know for sure that these grain elevators, because they are making good money right now, do we know that they are not going to be increasing the fee on the producer? If we cut them slack, which is great, are we gonna make sure that they're indeed not passing on any fee increases to their farmers? Because if we can guarantee that, then I'm certainly for that. I should say as a blanketed statement, I don't know what all grain elevators are making, but
Mr. Stuckey, maybe you can answer some of these questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Randy Stuckey, Kansas Grain and Feed Association. Certainly stand for any questions.
thank you so much for being here. So my question is, if we're going to allow this provision or motion to go through, are these grain elevators then not going to be passing on the fees to their farmers? I mean, do we know for sure that they're not going to pass on those fees?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative, thank you for the question. To be sure, the fees have already been increased, or will be as soon as the regulations are amended this summer. That bill was passed last year in Senate Bill 181. This is a reaction to that, and we discussed this with the agency last year. The fee increase was to be the double the 60,000 that's being asked for. So those fees are already going to be increased. Now, whether or not one individual elevator is able to or needs to pass those on, that's going to be dependent on the financial position of any independent elevator. But certainly, anytime a new tax or a new fee is added to any business, those fees and the costs are going to be passed along to the ultimate payer. It's if you have a business there's additional fees and taxes are added on to the administrative costs of a business. They'll do their best to consume those or pay for those, but ultimately they're going to have to be passed along in some fashion. So we understand that we're a regulated industry, and with those regulations come fees and taxes. The fees were increased or will be soon. This is just to help offset some of those fee increases, which again, that we've talked about before, this is a public good. The purpose for the inspection program is not for the elevators, not for the inspection of the elevators. It's for those that store their grain inside of the elevators to ensure that the audits happen, to ensure that what's being said on the books matches the grain being stored, just like a bank is audited to ensure that there's enough money matches what's actually on in the books. So that's the purpose of the inspection program. It's for the public good. It's been funded by SGF for many years now, decades. This is asked for an increase of $60,000 to help offset the fee increase that has happened and will happen without it.
Okay, so I'm sorry, let me just make sure that I understand this. So those inspectors that go into each of those grain elevators, so that's always been government and that's always been government funded?
I think the cooperative side of the house, they contract for independent auditors to come in for their own books, but certainly for the audits that are conducted for the state inspection program, those are conducted by the state agency.
I see. So we've already passed the fee increase, is what you're saying, last year.
Authority to do that, and the regulation package is going to be passed along this year. It's two steps. One is for $60,000 fee increase on the industry. There's another regulation that will be a part of that regulatory package that if we don't receive the SGF that's being moved today, then the additional $60,000 of fee increases will happen as a result of that. So we're going to try and offset that $60,000 additional fee increase by asking for the $60,000 from the SGF. Again, it'd be an increase to what's already been a longstanding practice as of using state general fund money for this public good. This is not just an inspection program for the industry. It's a public good to help ensure to the farmers who store their grain in the public grain warehouses that in fact their grain is there.
Representative Garber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Randy. You got a good name. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my head around this increase. You're saying that they already did a 60,000 and they plan to do another one if we don't give the 60,000.
So the authority in Senate Bill 181 last year, the authority to raise fees
Okay.
has been passed. The regulation to actually increase the fees to be assessed is yet to be passed. That's going to happen this summer.
And these are state inspection fees.
That's correct. Of the public warehouses, on the public warehouse.
Okay. I'll support this. Thank you.
So just to show you that sometimes the elevators don't get the best deal, I was setting a tax when their property tax was doubled, basically because they can't move them. You're stuck here. You know, it's sometimes not everything is fair in the farming business. So
Mr. Chair, so just so that I'm clear, so we actually, the industry has private auditors that they come in, make sure the grain is what it says. And then the state sends auditors out there also, like yearly, quarterly. I don't know how that process works.
we'll find out. We got plenty of people to talk about that.
Hi, Kelsey Wilson, Deputy Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. We do run a state inspection process that oversees the warehouses. They are inspected on at least an annual basis, and if we work with them to go in and assess. Some of them elect to have an additional auditor. Some of them elect to have us come back in a second time within their year and conduct an additional audit as well for whatever authorities that they also need to provide additional records to. So it can vary.
So, and they're just auditing grain. They're not inspecting the facility, like to make sure the facilities, or they're doing both.
They do both. So they'll actually go into the elevators and take measurements, either making, we use lasers that go and help us to determine if the volume of grain is there. They're also looking at some of the infrastructure that's in there. One of the regulations that we worked with industry is, as you might know, the infrastructure is quite aging. And one of the regs that we're working on that will hopefully get approved this summer will actually help us ensure that we only go into in grain elevators that have the correct safety harnesses and infrastructure in place, because some of them currently do not. And that puts our inspectors at risk.
It's interesting to me that that's a state issue instead of on the private business itself, that the fees for the
So it's an industry has a long time since standing. I can't remember, I mean, way before my time, when there was some mini elevators that went under, and producers lost their crops that were in the elevators, and they weren't able to spend that to sell those commodities. And there's both a state option and a federal option, and that they can choose to be inspected by.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. You ready to move your?
Mr. Chairman, I move my amendment.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed out. So we're still on the ag budget. Is there any more questions? Any more? Oh, Representative?
Might as well. I'm hot. Let's try another. Maybe I'm not that hot, but we heard the other day, and I've been talking with the Water Committee Chairman, Ranking, about their bill that they're working on. But one of the number one priority that they have, and they believe it's very important, and that's the dam safety program. And we covered that on one of the supplemental requests, correct, Victoria, in the budget. And it is a problem, and they believe that they would like to enhance go ahead, Jeff. Enhance the dam safety program. And Mr. Lewis is out there who could speak to it, which I will, if you have some questions, he will address those questions. But this is the first one of two amendments I have dealing with dam safety program. And Victoria, if you'll pass out that first one, and what it does is it recommends adding 150,000 from state general funds for a dam safety program study for 2023. And the topics that it would include, elevation, ID, the number of dams, potential statutory or regulatory changes to protect public safety, identification of funding needs for ongoing program operation, repair and rehabilitation. This is a high priority to initiate and complete a dam safety program study for next year. With that, Mr. Chairman, if we have any questions that I can't respond to, Mr. Lewis will be able to.
Discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, I don't know if that's the representative or the gentleman out here is, when was the last study done? Seemed like we would already have had a study on this, very similar. I would think that you guys would have something that was previously done.
Thank you, Representative Earl Lewis. I'm the Chief Engineer of the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources. I think it's been quite a while since we've had an overall study of the program itself and what the requirements should be. There were some changes made in 2013 that changed what the definition of a regulated dam is, but they didn't talk about things such as the frequency of when we need to inspect them and what we need to take into consideration of when we inspect them, nor how we go about making sure that we have a safe inventory. It changed the regulatory definition, but it didn't really go into the rest of the program.
And I asked that question because I figure this is something you probably should know, but then it is a necessity that, in my opinion, that we fund this. Thank you.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. So how many dams do we have in Kansas?
Well, again, it's kind of how you count them. There are about 2,500 dams that are regulated. That means there's a number of ways you measure that, but the easiest is that they hold back more than 125 acre feet of water. The change in 2013 was typically about 50 acre feet of water. So it went from 50 to 125. So a little over doubling. And again, we can look at what the right sizing of that is, but we're really not talking about that per se. If we look at the number that were regulated prior to 2013 and are on what's called the National Inventory of Dams, there's about 6,500. If we really think about the number across the landscape, I'm not sure that anybody has a really good idea once you get down to farm pond size. I've seen estimates of anywhere of 125 to 200,000 dams in the state of Kansas. But we're really talking about that 2,500 to 3,000 that we are currently regulated by the state of Kansas.
So that would be, the study would be on those dams.
Correct. It's really looking at, let me back up one step here. When we talk about dams and what needs to be looked at and regulated, we're looking about what is downstream. Is there housing? Is there roads that are well-traveled? Those kind of things. We look at a significant hazard. Dam might have a road that's not traveled very much, might have a barn or something that's not inhabited. If we go to high hazard, we're looking at a well-traveled road, a structure that's going to be a house or something like that. And so if it's a significant hazard dam, it needs to be, by statute, it's required to be inspected once every 5 years by a licensed professional engineer. If it's significant, if it's high hazard, it's every 3 years.
So these have been inspected, these 2,500 to 3,000 dams. As Representative Akla said, then probably at least every 5 years, this study has been done or inspected.
Well, they're supposed to be. That's part of it. Majority, these dams are inspected by the dam owner is required to go out and hire a professional engineer and inspect those. It's not always done on schedule, frankly.
So the 150,000, when you talked about dam owners, so some of these are private, then private property owners have these, own these. So that 150,000, because if we're already paying salary for folks to go in and do the study, so what's that 150 for?
So what we're looking at is trying to, as you might expect, a lot of the questions and concerns we get are the cost of the inspection that can run from $3,000 to $5,000 per inspection.
That the landowner pays?
Correct. And the frequency.
So this 150,000 would offset the landowner's cost?
The frequency really, or the study would really determine how often, go back and look at the history of all the dams and try and figure out how often we should be inspecting these dams. If you think about it, most of the dam failures that happen across the United States or anywhere really, it's really initially when they fill up or as they get older and some of the infrastructure starts breaking down. There's a good period of time, I believe, where if the dams are well maintained or in good shape, that there really is a low hazard of them failing. But the requirements we have today say it doesn't matter if it's 3 years old, 10 years old, 30 years old. If you are a high hazard dam, you're going to be inspected by a licensed professional engineer every 3 years. And so we would go back and try and look at the statistics and all the information and say, maybe we need to inspect it up front, and then maybe we need to do a lesser inspection for the next 10, 15 years. It would reduce the cost to the landowner.
So this is last question then, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So the cost of these inspections that you're saying could happen as frequently as every 3 years is on the landowner.
Is on the owner of the dam. Correct.
And so this study could determine that
Maybe
you're
we
going to
need to
want to
do
do
that.
them more frequently.
Maybe we need to do them less frequently. Maybe we don't need to be looking at all the full slate of things we do in an inspection. And so we're trying to bring down that cost to the dam owner, but still provide a safe inventory of dams. So it's kind of a little bit balanced.
To a landowner then, and you say, hey, you know what, we need to inspect your dam, it's $5,000. Does that landowner have any recourse, or are they just stuck having to pay a bill for $5,000 to the state
Well, they don't pay it to the state. They pay it to a private company, but yes, it's on them, and there's really no recourse that's required by statute at this point.
Just have to pay it
Correct.
if the state comes in and says, hey, we want to inspect your dams.
Again, so if you own a dam, that has housing below it, we're going to probably send you a letter once every 5 years that says it's time for your inspection. Right now, it's your job to go out and hire an engineer to do that inspection and send the report in. That's kind of the current process.
Perfect. Thank you for explaining that to me.
Any other questions? What, before you close, you might send the committee or to myself. I just kind of like to see what you determine high hazard. And the other question I have, are these dams by class, like your class A, or, I mean, you have a certain 125, Mr. Baker could probably tell us what 125 acre or whatever that means, but
Right.
I'm just trying to get a.
Right. So an acre foot of water is covering 1 acre of ground 1 foot deep with water, 326,000 gallons of water, basically, if you want to talk gallons.
125 acres covered.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Representative.
Could I ask Mr. Lewis one more question before you sit back down? Take us through, because I'm going to talk very soon about a water structure emergency fund. So how a dam, and then how would the water structure emergency fund complement this that we're talking about?
So the other piece you're going to talk about, hopefully here in a minute, is again, let me back up one step. Part of our funding for our dam safety program comes from the state. Part of it comes from a grant from the federal government, and that pays for part of our operating cost, our staff and travel and overhead, those kind of things. A part of the requirement for the national grant is that we have an emergency fund. We currently do not have an emergency fund. And so we ran into this very situation just not quite a year ago with a dam up by Hoyt that was actively eroding. We knew it was going to fail. There was a heavily traveled road and a home downstream. And so we ordered the dam owner to, we call control breach, essentially let the water out slowly under control so that it wouldn't fail catastrophically and cause damage downstream. The dam owner did not have the funding to do that. Because there was a declared state of emergency, we were able at that time to get access to some emergency funds in order to pay for that, breaching that dam and controlling that hazard. If we were not in a declared emergency, we would not have that access to those funds. And we've had that situation before where the owner of the dam doesn't have the funds. We don't have any access to funds. And so it goes unaddressed and ultimately fails. That's the impetus for the emergency fund is when that dam owner doesn't have the funds and there is a growing and imminent emergency of the dam failing, we need to have the funds to go in and take care of that with the expectation that when they repair the dam, we're going to get that money back as part of the deal here. So, we look at that as something that can come back in and be replenished. We look at this as a one-time cost. But again, it puts us in a position to respond to dams that are in imminent danger of failing, and the dam owner does not have the resources to deal with it.
So I understand the landowner owns the dam. I understand that.
Correct.
So does the landowner have the right to remove that dam?
The dam owner would have the right to remove that dam. Yes. Yep. Yeah.
At their own expense, obviously, but they
Correct.
have the right to remove it.
Correct. And obviously we would want to know about that so we could make sure it's done in a safe manner. But if they want to remove their dam, that's up to them.
Okay. Thank you.
Just one more quick question. So we have a lot of county lakes and city lakes and things like that. Do you inspect all those dams on a regular?
We do.
And they are required to do that?
There's very few dams that we inspect. That's been
correct.
But are inspected by, again, the county or their engineer or the city or their engineer. Again, anything more than 125 acre feet, and not a federal dam is going to be required to be inspected.
So when you say they're engineers, that there's lots of engineers.
Correct. It's an engineering firm, it's a consultant. I mean, now if a county has a licensed professional engineer or a watershed district has a licensed professional engineer on staff and they do it themselves, then they can do it themselves. But typically, they're going to go out and hire a consulting firm to do that work.
So that would be a qualified engineer.
It would be a qualified engineer.
Okay, and they are required to do that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Let's just, I move this amendment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. One more, and that's just what Mr. Lewis was talking about. Victoria, do you have this one sentence? And that's to create via 50,000 from the state general fund to create the water structures emergency fund, which Mr. Lewis just explained what it would be used for. Mr. Chairman, let's move this amendment, please.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Back on the budget. Any more discussion on the Kansas Department of Ag budget?
Okay, we have.
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the committee remembers the other day when KDA was testifying, they reminded us of a line items that accidentally got left out, and then they wanted to go back and correct that. And that's what this amendment is to reallocate this 298,000. It was accidentally left off, but it is part of their report. So it isn't anything new. It's just to fix what didn't get done initially.
I'll second that.
If you remember, committee, KDA or handed out this letter the other day, memorandum, which listed the problems.
Any discussion? Representative?
I move my amendment.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed out. Back on the Kansas Department of Agricultural budget. Is there,
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that we pass out the Department of Ag budget as amended.
any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The KDA dam budget is done. Thank you.
Victoria, this does not add up to that. I mean, I don't know if this passed because the dollars don't work.
He said he didn't know a damn thing, so.
We've got $294,000.
You know, he We adjourn.